The story begins with a girl named Aubrey Parker, who is at the funeral of her friend Grace Ross. She is very shaken by the loss, and her mind drifts through random memories, thinking about a night she spent at the beach with a man. During the wake, she can hardly focus on the conversations and feels nauseous upon seeing her friend's widower, a man named Mark. Overwhelmed by the situation, she decides to sneak out, but just then, a group of people suddenly surrounds her. One of them recognizes her face, and everyone seems excited to see her in person, but Aubrey says nothing to anyone and quickly steps away. A woman comes to talk to her and introduces herself as Alice, one of Grace's English cousins. She widens her eyes upon hearing Aubrey's name, as she didn't know she was speaking with someone so close to the deceased. Noticing that Aubrey is trying to leave discreetly, she mentions that Grace's letter arrived. Alice says that her cousin had been obsessed with a specific rhythm lately and always commented that Aubrey would understand it. Instead of going home, Aubrey heads to Grace's restaurant, the Golden Gourd. She pushes the key with a stick, sticking her hand through the small opening to grab it, and enters the deserted kitchen. Passing into the dining room, she pays attention to every detail, as if she wants to relive the memories, and prepares a drink for herself. Grimacing after the first sip, she speaks as if Grace were there with her and wonders how it is possible for her to like it so much. After that, she feeds the aquarium animals and a turtle named Bellini. Then Aubrey moves to the rooms where Grace lived. A telescope strategically positioned at the window provides a privileged view of a couple, and Aubrey laughs thinking about her friend spying on the neighbors. Deciding to spend the night there, she turns on some music and takes a shower before facing the empty bedroom. Next to the bed, there is a radio that crackles from time to time as if someone is trying to communicate. She lies down on the bed and takes the radio, stating her name and calling the unknown person on the other side, but hears nothing but static. Sleepless, she plays with the switch, turning the light on and off until she feels Grace's presence in the room and has the impression of seeing her lying in bed right next to her. A bit uncomfortable with this, she changes her mind and lies down on the sofa, thinking about that neighbor couple to distract herself. But then that memory of the night at the beach returns to haunt her, cutting the mood immediately. Still wide awake, she decides to call her mother, who asks how the wake was and begins insisting that Aubrey visit her soon. The call suddenly becomes very poor, and neither can understand the other. Telling her mother she isn't hearing anything, she says goodbye while wishing her a happy new year. When Aubrey finally falls asleep, she has a terrible nightmare about a man named Edward. He is sitting with his back to her when he hears her call his name, and then slowly turns his head, revealing a huge hole where his face should be. Aubrey wakes up with a start from the dream and realizes she is very cold since the heater seems to have turned off during the night. Through the window, she sees that it is snowing outside, and the city looks very quiet, with no one in the street. In the distance, a column of smoke is rising from a point in the forest. The Christmas tree lights she had turned on the night before are off, and the television won't turn on either. Up to this point, it could just be a power outage due to the bad weather, but she finds it strange that even the phone isn't working. Wearing a jacket, she goes to the backyard to turn on the emergency generator and is startled to hear a noise coming from the street. At this point, she is already suspicious that something odd has happened in the area and decides to check the restaurant door. Not seeing anything out of the ordinary, she goes back inside and shuts the door, but it is then that a person suddenly appears and bangs their hands on the glass, as if asking for help or trying to give a warning. The stranger runs away right after, hardly giving her time to recover from the scare, and she decides to chase after him. She loses sight of him after running a few blocks, and it becomes evident that something very serious has happened there. There are two plumes of black smoke coming from among the houses. Cars are parked haphazardly in the street, and there are several objects scattered in the snow, along with a trail of what looks like blood. Following this trail, she comes across an abandoned car with the door open and the windows also smeared with red stains. Upon reaching a corner, Aubrey looks to the side and is petrified to encounter some kind of creature. The thing is slowly rising and making a chilling sound that resembles gargling. As Aubrey runs away from it, we see some people inside the other houses observing her from the window. The creature arrives at the restaurant door a second after Aubrey manages to close it and begins growling on the other side. Panicked and very confused, she crawls under the tables and huddles behind the counter, listening to the monster's advances. The glass quickly cracks as the creature charges against the door, and suddenly a man's voice starts calling her name. Fumbling around the counter, she finds the radio and responds to the person, who begins giving her instructions. The man tells her to close her eyes and point the radio at the door. With no time to question it, Aubrey stretches out her arm with the radio in hand, fearful of leaving the spot. However, the man insists that she needs to get up and walk toward the door, where the monster is still battering the glass. He also makes it clear that Aubrey must not open her eyes at all. Gathering all her courage, she obeys and begins approaching the door with short steps, and her eyes tightly shut, aiming the radio at the enemy. Gradually, the blows become weaker and more spaced out until the only sound in the air is a peculiar noise coming from the radio. Opening her eyes, she sees that the being truly left and falls to her knees on the ground, exhausted. The man speaks again through the radio, recommending that she go upstairs and lock the door. As if all of this weren't bizarre enough, now the cutlery starts to levitate inexplicably. Aubrey remains terrified but has calmed down enough to focus on the mysterious hero and question how he knew her name. He says he is a friend of Grace and reveals that all of this has to do with her. Aubrey asks how he managed to scare the creature away, and he confirms her suspicions that the noise was a specific signal to have that effect. He says that Grace found something and that the first part is right there in her house. This intrigues her, but curiosity gives way to despair when she sees other people outside. She warns the man that there are people in danger, and he responds that there is nothing they can do. Aubrey becomes enraged upon hearing this and becomes even more nervous when he says he needs to hang up. Alone again, she begins to think that maybe she has died and that all this is hell. Just then, she notices an envelope on the shelf that has her name written in Grace's handwriting. Inside, there is a cassette tape with a label that says, "This recording will save the world." She plays the tape, and Grace's voice begins telling a story about a group of people who made a discovery. They found a hidden signal in a radio transmission, and Grace decided to help them search for others like it. This revealed several signals emitted in this secret way, always coinciding with some catastrophic event. All the transmissions are interconnected, but they've been missing number 7, which no one has been able to find. Confessing that she is afraid of letting this all fall into the wrong hands, Grace says she hid the tapes in the places they used to visit and used music tracks to cover up the signal. After listening to the message, Aubrey has a sort of vision where she is alone in a thicket and the alien noises start to surround her. When she picks up a rock from the ground to protect herself, the vision ends, and she sees herself back in the restaurant, banging on a poster on the wall. This opens a hole in the paper and reveals a compartment behind the poster where she finds several notebooks. She begins to study Grace's notes, and then the mysterious man calls her again on the radio. He says his name is Alfred and urges her to be very careful with the transmissions, as everything indicates that the signal can open some kind of portal. It was through one of them that the creatures arrived the night before, even though they themselves seem to fear the signal. Aubrey asks if the rest of the people are gone, and Alfred says there may be some who are just hiding. He admits that he doesn't have all the answers, nor does he even know the origin of the signal. It may have been transmitted for centuries by some expanding civilization that was just waiting for the moment to touch them in the right order. As Alfred speaks, Aubrey realizes that all the words he is saying are written in the notebooks in front of her. When he finishes the explanation, she says she has always dreamed of seeing the earth with no one else around, just bricks and trees, without any distractions. Alfred finds this comment strange and begs her to help him finish Grace's work, but she simply turns off the radio. Realizing that she will live there for a while, she arranges things her way, and her mood seems to gradually improve. Despite this, we see there is a rope tied in a noose shape, hanging from the ceiling on the second floor. To avoid staring at nothing during sleepless nights, she sticks a cheerful drawing on the ceiling. However, right on the following night, she wakes up with one of the aliens right above her and begins to punch it frantically until she realizes that it was just a nightmare and she is attacking the wall. Sometime later, the food runs out, and Aubrey comments to the turtle, now her only companion, that the water is also running low. The time has come to decide whether she will enter the same paranoia that contaminated Alfred and Grace. Listening to the tape again, she begins to find other clues about what really happened, and concludes that Grace built something capable of reading the signal. However, the experiment only worked after the disease had already taken Grace. This occurred on the first night Aubrey spent in her house, and probably had something to do with the overall catastrophe. Finally overcoming her fear of going out, Aubrey takes the turtle and the battery-operated recorder with her in case she needs to play the signal to defend herself from any of the aliens. She goes out dressed in a skin and walks past the same houses as before, but now there is no one at the window, and a blood stain covers the glass. The first stop is the supermarket down the street, and she takes the opportunity to restock the pantry. Trapped under one of the shelves, she finds the tape marked as number 3. Before leaving, she sees drops of blood on the floor, forming a trail that worsens until it leads to the freezer. Inside, she sees someone frozen who seems to have died days ago. Upon leaving there, she passes by one of the monoliths that inexplicably appeared on the day of the invasion and sees several partially destroyed buildings. Then the gargling sound begins, and Aubrey hides behind a car, watching the creature through the windows. Unable to control her fear, she runs away from there and even drops the recorder in her haste, but manages to grab it back before the beast reaches her. She gets into one of the abandoned cars and plays the tape while the alien shakes the vehicle incessantly. Crouched in the front seat, she dives into a fantasy world that ends up being very similar to hers, where there are also monsters behind her. Just like in the nightmare with Edward, she sees a boy with his back to her and tries to get close, but he also has a hole in the place of his face. The fantasy ends at the bottom of the sea, with long kelp trying to pull her away from the light. Aubrey awakens under the car, and, seeing that the alien is no longer nearby, gathers her belongings and continues her pilgrimage to the places she used to go with Grace. At the cinema, she sits in her usual seat and pulls out the tape hidden under the seat, which is number 4. Upon leaving the cinema, she sees a gigantic creature passing by that emits a colorful glow under its skin. Despite the astonishment, she is awed by that majestic being and watches until it is safe to resume walking. It is already nighttime when she arrives at the library and finds the door locked. After breaking a window, she lights a luminous stick to see the way to the shelves. She gets nervous when it suddenly goes out and quickly lights another one, bumping into a creature. However, this one is different from the others and doesn't seem to see her. Aubrey crawls to the fallen recorder and presses play, continuing her search cautiously. The tape number 5 is inside a box in the study room, where she lays down to sleep in the midst of a wall of books. In her dream, Grace appears by her side and says that Aubrey is showing some signs of psychological problems. When she speaks of disconnection from reality, Aubrey asks if the alien invasion is just a product of her imagination. Crying, she says she feels so guilty that she hasn't wanted to leave her friend's house since she arrived. She asks for forgiveness for not staying with Grace in her last days, and her friend tells her that she needs to forgive herself as well as confront the mistake she made that night at the beach. Later, Aubrey listens to one of the tapes and sees some books levitating, not knowing anymore what is created by her mind. She imagines herself in various different places until a noise in the library brings her back to reality. She hears voices of people talking and passes by a filming equipment, noticing that the clapperboard brings the title Starfish. Downstairs, there is a group discussing the movie scenes, and one of the people is a girl identical to Aubrey. The possibility of being just a character in a movie is too much for her, and that suddenly pulls her out of the trance. She sees that she is still wearing the headphones and sitting among the books on the mezzanine. The rest of the tape takes her to various other scenarios, the last of which is at the beach, where she sees herself walking toward the man waiting for her in the sea. The present-day Aubrey tries to stop the past Aubrey from continuing that, but trips and falls. Edward is sitting on the sand, crying, and her voice doesn't come out when she tries to speak to him. Angry, she goes to the other man, who is now turning into one of the creatures, and shoves him into the water. Back in the library, she feels sick after this experience and decides that she has had enough of listening to tapes for today. As she continues her journey, that different creature soon appears again. When it falls to the ground, the membrane surrounding it tears, and a creature just like the others emerges. Aubrey is standing a few meters away, pressing the button on the recorder, and just watches calmly as the monster walks away. Daylight breaks a few hours later, and Aubrey passes by Grace's grave before the long walk to the radio station. The tape number 6 is stuck behind a picture of Aubrey with a colleague. Knowing that the radio is the last stop in the treasure hunt, she plays all the tapes in order, transmitting the set of signals in the hope that it makes some difference. Once the last one ends, she says her name and pleads for someone to respond. A boy's voice begins to speak after a few moments, and Aubrey feels very happy to learn that he is with a group of people, as she feared being the only survivor. She explains that she transmitted the signal in order, and that should have closed the portal for good, as Grace intended. The boy replies that she shouldn't have transmitted a message without knowing what it was, and says that this only made things worse, opening a new passage instead of closing the previous one. However, Aubrey doesn't seem to hear him, as it is only now that she realizes that the labels on each tape form the phrase, "forget and forgive." Outside, an immense dome is forming between two monoliths, and Aubrey starts walking in that direction while the boy continues calling her name, alarmed to see that she no longer responds. Getting closer, she sees that they are drops of mud under the effect of inverted gravity and decides to let herself be sucked by the same force, floating along with her memories.